This long bridge behind me is somewhat unimaginatively known as the Puente Largo. When it was built in 1937, it was actually the longest bridge in Southern California. It was built as a railroad bridge for the Pacific Electric Railway. That's Henry Huntington's red car line. And now it's just a pedestrian and bike footbridge, and I guess pedal bridge. I'm not sure what you call a bicycle bridge. It was actually damaged heavily in a big flood of the San Gabriel River here in 1938. The damage remains today. We'll see that in a little bit as we cross it. The other thing that we can get a good view of here is the San Gabriel Mountains here, rising up out of the plain ahead of us. As we get just a little bit closer here, you'll see that they rise very steeply up from a fairly flat plain. As a geologist, when I see mountains rising steeply out of a plain like that, I tend to be very suspicious that there's a fault nearby. In this case, there is a fault. That fault is the Sierra Madre fault, or it's known as the Cucamonga fault as you go further east towards Rancho Cucamonga. So this fault is what we call a thrust fault. So it's basically a ramp that's dipping off to the north below the mountains there, and the mountains are being pushed up that ramp at a rate of about somewhat less than 1 millimeter per year. It's estimated that there's a major earthquake, magnitude 7 or bigger, about every 7,000 years on this fault. And when in each one of those earthquakes, it's thought that the mountains rise about 4 meters. So that's like maybe 13 feet or so. If your house was right up against the front there or was on the fault, then potentially, one half of your house would be lifted by 13 feet. There's a good reason why you shouldn't build directly on top of earthquake faults. Now, in addition to major earthquakes like magnitude 7, this fault also makes more frequent smaller earthquakes. Most recently, there was the magnitude 6.6 Sylmar earthquake in 1971, also known as the San Fernando earthquake. That earthquake caused moderate damage, and most notably, it almost collapsed the Van Norman Dam, which is a sort of combination flood control and water storage dam in the San Fernando Valley. Fortunately, the dam was only halfway full at the time because the dam actually partially collapsed at the level where the water was only a few feet lower than the dam. If the water had been any higher, it probably would have started spilling over the top and caused a catastrophic failure, which would have potentially killed over 100,000 people living downstream. So good news is that dam wasn't full, but it definitely highlights the danger of these large earthen dams. Let's see. So why is there these big mountains here in Southern California? Again, they rise up to like 10,000 feet at Mount Baldy, up out of a fairly flat plain. They're among the steepest mountains in the world, really. I mean, they're not as tall as something like the Himalayas, but the average slopes of them are very high, and they're being pushed up very rapidly. Something, again, maybe almost 1 millimeter per year or so. So the reason for that has to do with the San Andreas Fault. So if the San Andreas Fault were perfectly straight and parallel to the boundary between the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate, then the plates would just slide past one another and nothing exciting would happen. But as it happens, the San Andreas Fault is bent a little bit more in an east-west direction here, and that causes the Pacific Plate to bump into the North American Plate as they're sliding by one another. Which basically, as they bump together, that's what's pushing up the San Gabriel Mountains here on the Sierra Madre thrust. And if you go further east, the same bumping motion is also pushing up the San Bernardino Mountains. We'll be in later. So here you can see where half of this bridge got knocked down during the major 1938 flood of the San Gabriel River, and I guess they decided it wasn't worth the money to repair it. I think maybe ridership on the red car line was already past its peak by 1938. So I guess a single track bridge was wide enough. Okay, well, like, share, subscribe. See you guys next time.